The golden chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with light reflected from 1,000 banners, each representing a proud empire. The rulers of the galaxy sat in high seats, their voices sharp, their tones dripping with arrogance as they spoke. At the center of it all stood humanity's envoy, tall and silent, his hands folded behind his back as the storm of insults rained down upon him. The council had gathered not for peace but for punishment, and the target of their mockery was clear. One alien, scales glittering like polished stone, sneered and raised his clawed hand. "Humans are too dangerous," he declared, his words echoing through the chamber. "Too wild, too reckless, too violent to sit among us." Another alien, its wings folded behind its body, added with laughter, "Their fire cannot be tamed. Better to silence them before their chaos spreads." The chamber erupted in cruel laughter, the sound rolling like thunder. The envoy did not flinch. His eyes swept across the gathered rulers, meeting their stares one by one. Their laughter grew louder, but his silence was heavier than any argument he could have made. The council believed their words had broken him, that their jeers had reduced Earth to humiliation. They did not understand the storm that lay behind his calm face. They did not see the fire in his eyes. They thought silence meant weakness, when in truth, silence was sharper than any blade. The council leader, seated upon the highest throne, struck his staff against the floor. The sound boomed across the hall, silencing the laughter. "It is decided," he announced, his voice full of pride. "Earth is stripped of its seat. Humanity will no longer speak in this chamber. From this day forward, they are nothing but a forgotten race." The rulers cheered, their voices echoing off the golden walls. Some pounded their tables in celebration, others hissed or laughed openly. They believed the galaxy had been made safe from humanity's wild spirit. They believed they had won. The envoy finally moved. Slowly, he raised his head, his expression unreadable, his silence drawing every eye in the room. The chamber grew quieter as he stepped forward, his boots striking the floor with steady rhythm. He stopped at the center of the hall, where the banners of every empire hung above him. For a long moment, he said nothing. The rulers leaned forward, waiting for him to protest, to beg, to lash out. But his voice, when it came, was calm and steady, carrying through the silence like steel. "You think we are too dangerous," he said. "You call us wild. Perhaps you are right." His words made the chamber uneasy, but his eyes burned with certainty. "But remember this, one day, you will beg us to return." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some laughed again, but their voices were softer now, forced. Others shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his gaze. The envoy turned away, his long cloak trailing behind him as he walked slowly toward the great doors of the chamber. Each step echoed like a warning, each footfall carrying the weight of a promise. The rulers shouted after him, mocking his words. "Beg you? Never," one cried. "The galaxy will be better without you," another jeered. But their voices no longer seemed as strong. Their laughter no longer carried the same pride. The silence left behind by the human envoy pressed down heavier than their noise. The great doors opened with a thunderous creak, and the envoy stepped out into the starlit halls beyond. Behind him, the council returned to its noise, congratulating themselves on their decision, blind to what they had unleashed. They believed humanity's departure was the end of the story, that the galaxy would move on without them. They did not realize they had just written the first page of a new chapter. Outside the chamber, the envoy was met by his aides, young men and women who had watched in silence as their leader endured the insults of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. Their faces were tight with anger, their fists clenched, but he raised a hand to silence them before they spoke. "Let them laugh," he said softly, his voice calm but cold. "Their laughter will not last." His words echoed down the empty halls, carrying the same promise he had left in the chamber. Far across the stars, on Earth and in her colonies, humanity waited for news. When the word spread that their seat had been taken, that their voice had been silenced, there was no panic. There was anger, yes, but also a strange calm. The people of Earth had always known the galaxy feared them. Now it was only confirmed. And in that confirmation, a seed was planted. The council believed the humans had been cast aside. In truth, the humans had been set free. In the golden chamber, the council returned to its laughter, blind to the shadow their decision had cast over their future. They did not understand the weight of the envoy's silence, the strength hidden behind his calm eyes. They thought Earth was finished. They thought humanity was gone. But in the silence left behind, a storm was gathering. And when it broke, the galaxy would remember the day it mocked humanity, the day it stripped Earth of its voice. They would remember, because it would be the day that led to their greatest regret. The golden chamber was quiet after the envoy left, but the silence did not last long. Soon, voices rose again, proud and arrogant, echoing off the tall walls as the council celebrated their victory. The empty seat where humanity's banner once stood was already being cleared. The symbol of Earth rolled up and carried away like it had never existed. The rulers spoke of how the galaxy would now be safer, how order would be easier to maintain without the wild humans disrupting their perfect system. They laughed together, convinced they had broken a dangerous species. Yet beyond the chamber, far across the stars, their decision began to unravel the galaxy in ways they could not see. At first, it was small things. Convoys that had once moved with speed slowed down, because the human fleets that guarded the trade routes were no longer there. Pirates, who had long hidden in the shadows out of fear of human patrols, began to grow bold. They struck at supply lines, raiding ships with ease. Colonies at the edges of council space, once calm under the watchful eyes of human engineers, began to falter. Machines failed, systems broke down, and no one knew how to repair them. For years, the council had relied on human innovation, human discipline, and human courage without realizing it. Now, in their absence, the cracks in their empire began to show. The empty chair of Earth haunted the council. Whenever they met, the space where the human envoy once sat seemed heavier than all the others. Some rulers ignored it, pretending the absence meant nothing. Others avoided looking at it, uncomfortable with what it reminded them of. The council leader declared boldly, "Humanity's silence is proof of our wisdom. They were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Now we are stronger without them." But even as he spoke, unrest began to stir in the worlds beyond their walls. On frontier colonies, governors complained of failing infrastructure. "We need human specialists," they begged, but the council dismissed their concerns. On military fronts, alien admirals found their fleets less effective, their strategies crumbling without human officers who had once stood beside them. Whole campaigns slowed or failed. Soldiers whispered of Earth's absence, and morale dropped lower with every passing day. The council tried to fill the gap with pride, boasting that they had removed a threat. But whispers spread that perhaps they had removed their strongest shield instead. In taverns and markets across the galaxy, common citizens talked quietly about the humans. Some mocked them as the council did, but many spoke in hushed tones of respect. "The humans never backed down," one trader said. "When pirates came, it was humans who fought first." Another whispered, "Our machines came from Earth's designs. Without them, who will keep us running?" The stories grew, and so did the doubt. The laughter in the golden chamber began to sound more like desperation than confidence. Meanwhile, on Earth, silence reigned. The council thought humanity would beg for forgiveness, would send envoys back to reclaim their seat. But no plea came. No message, no apology, no desperate cry for recognition. The humans simply turned their backs and walked away. Behind closed doors, Earth's leaders gathered. They spoke not of loss, but of opportunity. The council had cast them out, but in doing so, had freed them from chains. No longer bound by alien laws, no longer silenced by alien mockery, humanity was free to decide its own path. In that freedom, something dangerous began to take shape. The council misread the silence. They thought it meant defeat. But silence, in humanity's hands, was never defeat. It was patience. It was preparation. As Earth turned inward, its factories roared louder, its shipyards lit the skies, and its scientists unlocked projects long hidden from prying alien eyes. The dragons that had once been whispers in secret bunkers were now spoken of with purpose. Humanity would not beg to return. They would wait until the galaxy came crawling to them. Back in the council, debates grew heated. The first months after Earth's departure were filled with confidence, but by the end of the year, cracks had widened into chasms. Trade routes failed, rebellions grew, and fleets weakened. Some rulers demanded that Earth be invited back, arguing that their absence had created more chaos than their presence ever had. Others refused, their pride too deep, insisting that humanity must never return. The chamber that had once laughed so easily now echoed with anger and fear. And still, the empty chair sat there, a reminder of their betrayal. The envoy's last words haunted them, "One day, you will beg us to return." Many dismissed it as arrogance when he said it, but already it felt like prophecy. And deep inside, even the proudest rulers began to wonder if the day was coming sooner than they dared to admit. The cracks in the council's power grew wider with every passing cycle. What began as whispers in the markets and quiet doubts among soldiers now became shouts in the streets and protests on colonies. The galaxy had grown used to a balance, a strange order where humans, though mocked and insulted, were always present. They had been the quiet hands that built, the sharp minds that solved, and the steady soldiers who fought where others hesitated. Without them, the fragile web that held empires together began to snap thread by thread. On the frontier, chaos spread fastest. Colonies once kept secure by human fleets found themselves vulnerable. Pirate clans, long terrified of Earth's patrol ships, now surged forward like hungry wolves. Merchant convoys that once traveled freely through human-protected space now vanished, leaving only wreckage drifting in the void. Governors sent desperate messages to the council, begging for aid, but the council's fleets were stretched too thin. Without human officers, without human engineers guiding strategies, the alien admirals made mistakes, and entire sectors suffered for them. The council dismissed the losses as growing pains, but the people knew better. They whispered that humanity had been the spine of the galaxy, and now the galaxy was bending under its own weight. Civil unrest exploded on worlds closest to the crisis. On one mining colony, protests turned violent after shipments failed to arrive, leaving millions without supplies. Citizens shouted in the streets, chanting Earth's name, demanding the council bring back the humans. Soldiers tried to silence them, but even the soldiers muttered the same doubts in secret. The humans would never have let it come to this, they said. The council's leaders, safe in their golden chamber, pretended the voices were nothing more than noise, but the unrest reached farther with every passing day. Meanwhile, the council's wars began to falter. Old rivalries between empires that had once been kept under control reignited in the absence of human mediation. Border conflicts broke out, small skirmishes turned into large battles, and alliances that had once leaned on Earth's reputation of fairness began to crumble. The humans had been mocked as wild and dangerous, but their presence had kept predators from turning on each other. Without them, the galaxy's old hunger returned. The council held emergency sessions, their golden chamber filled with shouts and accusations. Some rulers demanded stricter control, greater military force to suppress rebellion and piracy. Others pointed fingers, blaming rival empires for failures. Yet when the subject of humanity arose, silence always followed. No one wanted to admit it, but all felt it. The absence of Earth's voice was the ghost haunting every decision. The empty chair in the chamber was like a wound that would not heal. The rulers told themselves they were stronger without humans, but deep down, many began to wonder if the envoy's words had been a warning, not arrogance. One day, you will beg us to return. Across the stars, ordinary citizens did not wonder, they believed. Traders told stories of Earth's fleets, how they had once stood against pirates without hesitation. Engineers swore by human designs, saying alien systems were failing because they lacked Earth's precision. Farmers whispered that their crops had grown better under human guidance. Even children on distant colonies began to play games where they pretended to be human soldiers, standing tall against endless enemies. The legend of humanity was growing, fueled not by propaganda but by memory. The more the Council mocked Earth, the more the galaxy remembered what it had lost. And on Earth itself, the silence continued. The Council mistook that silence for defeat, but in truth, It was the sound of preparation. Shipyards blazed with new fire, constructing vessels larger than anything the galaxy had seen. Hidden facilities that had long been kept in shadows came alive, their secrets unlocked at last. Scientists worked without rest, engineers forged weapons that the Council had only heard of in rumors, and soldiers trained harder than ever before. Humanity had turned inward, but not in shame, in determination. They did not need the Council's seat anymore. They were building something greater than a seat. The rulers of the Council could not see it, but they could feel it. Reports arrived of human ships sighted at the far edges of space, moving in silence. Rumors whispered that Earth was gathering allies, smaller species tired of Council chains. Others swore they had seen shadows of massive black warships, unlike anything in the records. The Council dismissed them as lies, but the unease remained. Humanity's absence was no longer simply a gap. It was a threat. The galaxy had thought casting Earth out was a victory. Instead, it was becoming their undoing. The cracks in the Council's empire were no longer small. They were spreading, reaching deeper every day. And in the silence of Earth, in the patience of its people, a storm was gathering. The envoy's words, once mocked, now carried weight like prophecy. The Council had turned humanity away, but the galaxy itself was beginning to whisper. Perhaps it was not humanity who needed the Council. Perhaps it was the Council who would need humanity. And already, in the quiet halls of Earth, preparations were being made for the day when the galaxy's begging would begin. The silence of Earth began to spread through the galaxy like a shadow, and that silence frightened the Council more than any war cry could have. For centuries, they had mocked humans as too reckless, too wild, too dangerous. Yet now, with humanity gone, the galaxy felt colder, less stable, and far more dangerous than before. The laughter that had filled the Golden Chamber during the vote of betrayal no longer rang so loudly. It lingered in the air as a memory, one that even the rulers themselves began to regret. Whispers grew louder on every world. Traders swore they had seen human fleets moving at the edges of space, silent and black against the stars. No one could confirm it, but the stories spread anyway. The humans are building something, they said in hushed tones. They are waiting, watching, preparing. Entire taverns fell silent whenever those words were spoken. For while the Council told its people that humanity had been broken and cast aside, the galaxy remembered differently. They remembered the envoy's promise, "One day, you will beg us to return." The whispers were not just about fear. They were also about hope. On oppressed colonies where Council soldiers ruled with cruelty, people began to whisper that maybe humanity had not abandoned them, that maybe the humans were waiting for the right moment to strike. Small rebellions rose, carrying human flags as symbols of defiance. Even species that had once voted against Earth now wondered if their decision had been a mistake. Without the humans, who will protect us? They asked. The answer was clear: no one. The Council, in their pride, dismissed these whispers as lies and rumors. They told their people that humanity had gone silent because they were weak. Yet even within the chamber, the rulers began to feel unease. Every time they gathered, their eyes drifted to the empty chair. It was not just a symbol of absence, it was a warning carved into the heart of their power. They tried to speak proudly, but their words felt hollow in the presence of that void. The emptiness carried more weight than their speeches, more power than their decrees. On Earth, the silence was no accident. Behind closed doors, the humans were preparing. Shipyards blazed day and night, their skies lit by engines of warships being born. In underground bunkers, weapons that had been only whispers were completed at last. Soldiers trained harder than ever, their discipline forged from the memory of betrayal. Leaders spoke not of revenge but of inevitability. They knew the galaxy would one day come crawling back, desperate for help, and when that day arrived, humanity would be ready. The dragons, those mythical weapons spoken of in rumors, were more than myth now. Deep beneath oceans, within mountains, and hidden in orbiting stations, they stirred. Black warships with wings of fire, armed with weapons the galaxy had never seen, were being readied in silence. Humanity had not been broken. Humanity had been unleashed. Back in the galaxy, the The fear of humanity's silence grew with every disaster. A great famine struck one sector after supply lines collapsed under pirate attacks. Once, humans would have organized aid, would have sent fleets to protect the convoys. Now there was nothing but empty promises from the Council. Entire worlds starved, and their people whispered bitterly. The humans would never have let this happen. In another system, a rebellion broke out against the Council's taxes, spreading like fire across 3 colonies. Without human mediators to calm the storm, the conflict exploded into war. The Council sent fleets, but the fighting only worsened. More and more, the galaxy began to see the Council not as rulers but as fools who had thrown away the one power that kept everything together. The rulers grew desperate. Some suggested sending envoys to Earth to ask for cooperation, but pride silenced them. "We cannot beg those who are beneath us," they insisted. But in their hearts, they knew the truth. The begging had already begun, only not with their voices. It was the galaxy itself, the colonies, the traders, the soldiers, who were already crying out for humanity's return. The envoys' words echoed louder with each passing day, haunting every decision. "One day, you will beg us to return." At first, they had mocked those words as arrogance. Now, they felt like prophecy. The Council had turned their backs on humanity, but the galaxy itself was beginning to turn its back on the Council. And still, Earth said nothing. No threats, no pleas, no replies to messages sent in secret. Just silence. That silence was heavier than war drums, more terrifying than fleets. Because silence meant preparation. Silence meant waiting. Silence meant that when humanity returned, it would not be as a voice asking for a seat. It would be as a power taking the throne. The Council had thought casting Earth out was the end. Instead, it was the beginning of their slow collapse. And in the shadows, in the silence, humanity sharpened its claws, waiting for the moment when the galaxy would finally beg them to return. The silence from Earth had lasted longer than anyone expected, and it was beginning to crush the galaxy under its weight. At first, the Council tried to spin it as victory, claiming that humanity had accepted defeat and crawled back to their fragile little planet. But time proved otherwise. Humanity had not begged for reentry, had not pleaded for trade, had not even sent diplomats to soften their words. Instead, Earth remained completely quiet. That silence spread like a shadow through the galaxy, and with every passing day, the cracks in the Council's grand empire grew wider. The first real collapse came at the edge of Council space. A resource-rich colony world had long been the pride of its empire, but when pirate fleets swarmed its skies, no help arrived in time. Without human patrols to strike first and chase predators away, the pirates moved with ease, raiding supply depots and burning orbital stations. The local governor called for aid from the Council, but reinforcements were delayed, trapped in bureaucratic arguments and bad planning. By the time ships finally arrived, the colony was in ruins, its citizens fleeing into the void. The Council declared the incident an unfortunate tragedy, but to the people of the galaxy, it was proof. Earth's absence was not weakness. It was the galaxy's weakness. More stories followed. Entire sectors began to fall into chaos. Supply routes that had once been stabilized by human fleets collapsed, plunging entire trade networks into famine. Rebellions sparked on border colonies where humans had once been mediators. Alien soldiers, lacking human allies to steady their morale, deserted their posts in growing numbers. One by one, the worlds that had once thrived under a fragile order began to sink into disorder. Citizens whispered bitterly in markets and taverns. The humans would never have let this happen. The Council thought themselves strong, but without Earth, they are blind. Inside the Golden Chamber, the rulers of the Council argued endlessly. Their proud speeches no longer carried the same force, and their voices sounded weaker with each new report of disaster. One ruler shouted, "This is proof we were right to cast them out. Humans only caused chaos." But another struck the table with trembling hands. "No. This chaos exists because they are gone. We were blind. We threw away the one species that could hold the line." The arguments grew fiercer, but the empty chair remained, a silent reminder that no matter what was said, humanity's absence was the wound at the center of it all. And still, Earth gave no answer. Envoys sent in secret to the homeworld returned empty-handed. The humans received their messages but did not respond. Some envoys never returned at all, their ships simply vanishing after entering human space. The Council interpreted the silence as arrogance, but the truth was far more dangerous. Humanity was not ignoring them. Humanity was waiting. Waiting for the galaxy to understand the weight of their mistake. On alien streets, the people had already understood. Rebellions carried human flags as their banners, declaring Earth as the symbol of resistance against the Council. Pirates whispered that they feared the day human warships returned, because when they did, no shadow would protect them. Even oppressed species, long silent under the Council's hand, began to murmur that perhaps Earth was the galaxy's only hope. The Council's mockery had transformed into the galaxy's prayer. Bring back the humans. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of Earth, the silence was broken only by the roar of engines and the hum of factories. Vast shipyards grew brighter every night as new fleets were born. Scientists unlocked projects hidden for generations, weapons that no alien eye had ever seen. Soldiers trained in silence, their discipline sharpened by the memory of betrayal. They did not march for glory, nor for conquest. They marched for inevitability. Humanity knew the day would come when the galaxy, beaten and broken, would crawl to their doors. And when that day came, Earth would not return as a beggar for a seat. It would return as the master of the table. The Council had thought humanity's silence meant surrender. But the truth was far simpler, far deadlier. Silence was patience. Silence was preparation. And the more the galaxy suffered, the more Earth's silence thundered in their minds. By now, even the proudest rulers began to admit the truth in whispers. The envoy's final words in the chamber had not been a threat. They had been prophecy. One day, you will beg us to return. And in the 5th year of Earth's absence, as rebellions spread, fleets collapsed, and citizens cried out in despair, the prophecy began to come true. The galaxy had once laughed at humanity. Now, in their silence, the galaxy wept for them. And above it all, hidden from alien eyes, the dragons stirred in their cradles, preparing for the day when Earth would answer, not to return as one voice among many, but to take the throne of the stars. The galaxy was bleeding, and the rulers of the Council could no longer pretend it wasn't. For months, they had argued in their golden chamber, hiding behind words and arrogance, but reality was breaking down their illusions. Entire sectors were collapsing into chaos, colonies were rebelling, and trade had ground to a near halt. The order they had claimed to build was unraveling without the one species they had mocked. The very thought poisoned them, but the truth could not be denied. Without humanity, the galaxy was falling apart. The first cracks came from within their own people. On countless worlds, civilians took to the streets, carrying banners and shouting openly against their leaders. They demanded food, security, order, things the Council could no longer provide. In hushed tones, they cried for the return of humanity. On mining colonies, workers painted Earth's symbol on walls. On frontier worlds, rebel groups raised human flags and swore they would not bow to the Council anymore. Soldiers who were sent to crush the uprisings returned shaken. They whispered of mobs chanting Earth's name, of crowds who saw humans not as monsters, but as saviors. For the rulers in the Golden Chamber, this was more terrifying than rebellion. It was the beginning of a legend greater than their own. The Council panicked. They knew the galaxy was slipping through their fingers, so they gathered in secret. Envoys were dispatched quietly to Earth under flags of truce. Ships carried desperate messages, pleading for dialogue. But humanity gave no answer. Some envoys returned with empty hands, saying the humans listened but remained silent. Others never came back at all, their vessels swallowed by the void of human-controlled space. The message was clear. Earth was not ready to speak. Earth would not return on the Council's terms. The silence from Earth was heavier than war. The Council could have fought fleets, crushed armies, or negotiated treaties, but silence gave them nothing to fight. Silence meant waiting. Silence meant the unknown. It was patience sharpened into a blade. Every day, the galaxy wondered what humanity was building, what ships and weapons were being forged behind their walls. Rumors filled the void. Traders swore they had seen colossal black warships at the edge of space, silent shadows larger than any alien dreadnought. Others whispered of soldiers in black armor, faces hidden, moving like ghosts through the dark. The council dismissed these as lies, but the fear in their voices betrayed the truth. In the Golden Chamber, the rulers argued louder than ever. Some demanded war against Earth, to strike before the silence broke. Others hissed that such an act would be suicide. "We saw what they did with nothing but a seat in this chamber," one alien said bitterly. "What do you think they are doing now that they are free?" For the first time, the council was not united in arrogance. They were divided in fear. Meanwhile, on Earth, the silence was alive with motion. Factories thundered, skies filled with construction, and hidden shipyards blazed with new life. Warships unlike anything the galaxy had seen were completed in silence, their black hulls built to vanish into the void. Weapons long forbidden by the Council's laws were perfected, each one sharper, deadlier, and beyond alien imagination. Humanity's leaders stood in silence, watching their preparations, knowing the day would come when the galaxy would have no choice but to crawl to their doors. And when that day came, humanity would not enter as a voice asking for mercy. They would enter as the storm itself. The Council's power crumbled further when one of its greatest empires collapsed. A chain of colonies rose up in rebellion, refusing to pay tribute, refusing to acknowledge the Council's rule. Their leaders shouted openly, "Bring us back the humans, or we will burn your banners." The rebellion spread like fire, unstoppable, and the Council was helpless to control it. Fleets sent to crush the uprising were ambushed and destroyed. Entire planets switched sides, abandoning the Council's authority in favor of independence. The rulers realized, with growing horror, that the galaxy was beginning to choose humanity, even in their absence, over them. Desperation set in. The Council leader, once arrogant and smug, now trembled behind his throne. In a private meeting, he whispered words none had expected, "We must beg them. We must bring them back, or we will not survive." The chamber fell silent, for in that moment, the envoy's prophecy echoed again, sharper than ever. "One day, you will beg us to return." And now, that day had come. The galaxy was begging. Worlds pleaded, soldiers muttered prayers, civilians shouted Earth's name. Even the Council itself could no longer deny the truth. The absence of humanity had become the greatest weapon Earth could ever wield. Their silence was more powerful than fleets. Their distance was more terrifying than war. But Earth did not answer. Not yet. They were waiting, patient as hunters in the dark. And the longer the galaxy begged, the more power humanity gathered. When they returned, it would not be as a voice among many. It would be as the storm that silences all others. The rulers shivered as another report arrived of lost fleets, of rebellion spreading, of order crumbling. They no longer laughed. They no longer mocked. The Golden Chamber that once rang with arrogance was now filled with fear. The galaxy was crumbling in their hands, and all because they had turned their backs on the one species they could not control. The silence of Earth was no surrender. It was the sound of preparation, of vengeance waiting, of destiny unfolding. The Council realized too late that they had not silenced humanity. They had unleashed them. The galaxy had reached its breaking point. Entire sectors burned with rebellion, trade routes were choked by piracy, and colonies starved under the Council's failure. Where once the Golden Chamber had roared with laughter, now it echoed only with fear. The rulers who had mocked humanity years ago sat in silence, their pride shattered, their words empty. They had believed Earth's absence would bring order, but all it had brought was collapse. The whispers had grown into open cries across the stars, "Bring back the humans." At last, the Council broke. They gathered their remaining strength and sent a final plea. A great delegation of ships, marked with banners of surrender, was dispatched to Earth. Leaders who had once laughed at the envoy now came trembling, their voices low, their faces pale. "We beg you," they whispered when their messages reached human space. "Return to the Council. Save the galaxy. Forgive us." It was the moment the envoy had promised, the day humanity had warned them of. The galaxy was begging. But Earth gave no immediate answer. The alien fleets waited outside the borders of human space, their messages echoing into silence. No reply came for days, then weeks. Despair spread through the delegates as they realized the truth. Humanity was listening, but humanity was deciding on its own terms. When the reply finally came, it was not a message. It was a shadow. Sensors lit up across half the galaxy as fleets emerged from the void. Black warships larger than dreadnoughts appeared in silence, their engines burning with crimson light. They did not broadcast greetings, they did not announce their arrival. They simply existed, overwhelming the stars with their presence. The rumors of the dragons had been true. Humanity's silent years had not been wasted. They had forged an armada unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Alien crews trembled as the ships drew near. The dragons were nothing like council fleets. Their designs were brutal, efficient, and terrifying, built not for display, but for war. Weapons lined their hulls, systems hummed with unseen power, and every movement carried the weight of precision. For the first time, the galaxy understood what Earth had done in silence. They had not prepared for return. They had prepared for dominance. Then came the soldiers. Dropships descended on worlds racked by rebellion, not to conquer but to bring order. Black armored troops marched through burning streets, driving out pirates, ending riots, and delivering supplies to starving civilians. To the people of the galaxy, it felt like a miracle. Where the Council had failed, humanity succeeded with frightening ease. Citizens who once mocked Earth now wept in relief, falling to their knees as the dragons restored what had been lost. The legend of humanity was no longer whispers, it was reality. In the Council's golden chamber, the rulers watched the broadcasts in horror. Every alien citizen cheered for humanity, every colony pledged loyalty to Earth, and every soldier spoke of human strength with awe. The rulers realized they had lost not only their fleets, not only their power, but their people. The galaxy no longer looked to them. The galaxy looked to Earth. And then, the doors of the chamber opened. Human boots echoed across the marble floor, steady and unhurried. Soldiers in black armor marched in silence, their rifles raised in discipline but not in haste. Behind them walked the envoy, the same man who had once been humiliated in this very chamber. His face was calm, his eyes cold, his silence heavier than the Council's pride had ever been. He walked to the empty chair, but he did not sit. Instead, he climbed the steps to the throne itself. The rulers trembled, their arrogance gone. One dared to speak, his voice breaking, "You cannot take this seat, it is not yours." The envoy looked at him, his expression unchanging, and spoke at last. "It became ours the day you thought you could silence us. You mistook silence for defeat. You mistook patience for weakness. And now, you will live with your mistake." The chamber was silent. No one argued. No one laughed. Humanity had returned, not as a single voice among many, but as the storm that silenced all others. The envoy lowered himself onto the throne, his hands resting on its arms, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. The banners of Earth unfurled above him, covering the gilded walls with crimson. The galaxy watched the broadcast in awe as the envoy spoke the final words, "You begged for our return. But we do not return as servants. We return as the dragons. And from this day forward, the galaxy answers to humanity." The rulers bowed their heads in shame. Across the stars, citizens cheered. And in that moment, the prophecy was fulfilled. Humanity had been mocked, betrayed, and silenced. But in the end, it was humanity who sat upon the throne of the stars, while the Council cowered in their shadow. The laughter of the past was gone forever, replaced by the roar of a new power. The dragons had risen, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy watched in silence as the new order took shape. The Council's banners, once symbols of pride and domination, now hung in tatters across their golden chamber. In their place, the crimson standard of Earth draped the walls like fire spreading over dry fields. For generations, alien rulers had looked upon humanity as an inconvenience, something to mock, something to control. Yet now those same rulers sat with bowed heads, their voices stolen by fear. They had begged for humanity's return, and humanity had answered. But not as supplicants, not as allies, not even as equals. They had returned as the dragons, a force that could not be chained. The envoy sat upon the throne, the same man who had once been silenced in humiliation. His calm face had not changed, but his presence was different now. No longer was he a lonely voice among jeering rulers. Now he was the weight of destiny itself. He looked down at the gathered council, his gaze steady and cold. "You laughed at our warning," he said, his voice soft but heavy enough to fill the chamber. "You thought stripping us of our seat was the end. But in truth, it was your end that began that day." His words carried like fire, searing into the minds of every ruler who heard them. Across the galaxy, the broadcasts continued. Civilians, soldiers, traders, everyone watched as Earth claimed the seat of power. On frontier colonies that had lived under starvation and raids, people wept openly, whispering thanks to the humans who had returned order. On rebellious worlds, banners of Earth were raised alongside cries of freedom. And on pirate bases, whispers spread like wildfire. "The dragons are awake. No shadow will protect us now." The very mention of Earth's fleets became enough to strike fear into those who thrived on chaos. Humanity had turned their silence into legend, and their return into prophecy fulfilled. But Earth was not cruel in its vengeance. The soldiers who marched through alien cities did not slaughter civilians or burn colonies. They restored order, rebuilt systems, and drove back chaos. They brought food where there was famine, protection where there was fear. Yet every action carried a reminder. This was no longer the Council's galaxy. This was humanity's galaxy. The dragons were not destroyers alone. They were guardians as well. And in that duality lay their true power. For the people of the galaxy, who once mocked Earth, now found themselves looking to humans not with scorn but with desperate hope. The Council's rulers, however, were not spared. One by one, they were forced to kneel, their empires stripped of the arrogance that had once blinded them. The envoy did not order their execution. Instead, he allowed them to live, but in silence, beneath humanity's shadow, as a reminder of their betrayal. "You will sit here," he told them, "not as rulers, but as witnesses. You will watch as we do what you could not, bring order to the stars." The humiliation was sharper than death, and the rulers knew it. Their power was gone forever. Beyond the chamber, humanity's fleets spread across the stars. The dragons were unleashed in full force, their black hulls cutting through the void like blades. Wherever they went, rebellion ended, piracy was crushed, and entire sectors pledged loyalty. Even species that had never trusted Earth now begged for protection, offering their allegiance in exchange for security. Humanity had become what the Council never could, both a sword and a shield, feared and respected in equal measure. On Earth itself, the people watched with pride. They had been mocked, silenced, and cast aside, but now their children grew up under a new banner. They were no longer seen as prey, no longer as outcasts. They were the rulers of the stars, the dragons whose roar echoed across the galaxy. Families lit fires in remembrance of the colonies bombed years ago, whispering that their sacrifice had not been in vain. Those flames, once symbols of loss, were now symbols of rebirth. The envoy remained on the throne, his gaze always fixed forward. He knew the galaxy's begging had only begun. New threats would rise, rebellions would spark, and enemies would crawl out of the shadows. But none of that mattered. Humanity had been tested in fire and betrayal, and they had emerged stronger than ever. He remembered the day the Council had laughed, the day they had silenced Earth's voice. And now, as he sat where no human had ever sat before, he knew the truth. They had not silenced humanity, they had unleashed it. The chamber that once mocked Earth had become the seat of their empire. The galaxy that once jeered at their weakness now trembled at their strength. And the words that had once been spoken as a warning now echoed as eternal law, "One day, you will beg us to return." That day had come, and the galaxy would never forget it. From that moment forward, the stars themselves carried a new truth. Humanity did not return to ask for a seat. Humanity returned to take the throne. And with the dragons awake, the galaxy would never laugh at Earth again.